Hello and welcome to our listeners on this next episode of Tghat Forum. I'm Chessie Baldwin, I'm a historian and member of Tghat Forum, and I will be your host this evening. And we have a very special discussion in store with our esteemed panelists. We'll be talking about information as a weapon, but also identity and belonging for Tigrayans around the world. And I want to just start off with the title of the very personal essay written by our guest this evening, which is "Our suffering may not be convenient, but it is real." And this is the opening to Temesgen Kahsay's piece for African Argument on the human cost of a one-sided story. Temesgen is an assistant professor at the Norwegian School of Leadership and Theology, and his recent article on narratives and social cohesion in the Tigray War has struck a chord with a great many people. And we're very pleased he agreed to join us today to talk more about these issues. So, Temesgen, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Thank you, Chessie. Thank you for having me. My name is Temesgen Kahsay. I'm from Tigray, now based in Norway. And I'm working in the Norwegian School of Leadership and Theology. I'm teaching courses in mission, Christianity, and religion and society. That's where my main area. And I've been a little bit writing about the situation in Tigray, and I've been trying to articulate how the war has been affecting me personally and my family and the people that I know. And that's a short, brief introduction about myself.
Lovely, thank you. We also have with us tonight our regular host, who's turned panelist, Teklai Gebremichael. Teklai is a member of Tghat Forum, and he is, I like to say, a specialist on the intersections between technology and humanity. So we're delighted to have his insights as well this evening. Teklai, would you please introduce yourself and say a few words?
Thanks for having me, Chessie. I think the only thing I would say is I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think our viewers should be familiar with me.
Wonderful. So as I said, we're going to delve into the detail of the power of information and manipulated narratives, role of social media in controlling voice. After all, the Prime Minister did declare war on Tigray on his Facebook page, while meanwhile the blackouts of communication in Tigray have permitted the federal government's narrative dominance. And we know that information is power, and I'm sure we'll get into the detail of how it can be used as a tool of warfare, as deadly and dangerous as any other. But we will also talk tonight about belonging and what it means to be Tigrayan, Eritrean and Ethiopian as they intersect. And this war has brought personal identity to the forefront, and we'll soon get our panelists' views on these themes and the impact that they have had on their personal lives since the war began. But first, a question, please, for Temesgen. In your essay, you explore the influence of state media and blockades on information during the war. And I want to ask, how does an exclusively one-sided narrative shape the way that people understand reality? How does that translate for an audience who are themselves struggling to access information? And you have a particularly interesting insight on this, having been in a house where both sides of one story were being shared, sometimes in diametrical opposition. So how does one story become the only story?
Thank you, Chessie. As I reflected on my article, especially the current war in Tigray, it just forced me to go back to my childhood time. And just to give some background for our audience, I grew up in Asmara. Both my parents are from Tigray, but they moved to Eritrea, and my father joined the army at that time. And we grew up, we lived in a military camp called Kanyo. That's where the headquarters for the army was. And it was a daily routine for us to listen what the government media, because there was only one TV, one radio station. So day in, day out, morning, during the day, during the evening, we only listen to what the government has said or has to say. And it was a time of war at that time, and it's a regular routine for me to grow up with that kind of information. That how many enemy soldiers were killed, how many people were, how many brigades were destroyed, or what the soldiers or the army has done. So it's kind of a constant feed of the propaganda, I would say, and that is how my formative years or my childhood was shaped by that sort of media and propaganda. And it had a very strong impact on myself and how I saw myself and how I interpreted the world around me at that moment. And again, my father being a soldier, I also wanted to become a soldier when I grew up. I also shared something about that aspect in my previous article. But the only source of alternative information was what my mother was able to do in that context. But just to give some background, it's when the media is only provides one single narrative, one single source, it just creates its own world for people. And it's very difficult for people to see another perspective or another angle if they are not able to get out of that, or if they are not exposed to another source of information. And that sort of media, that sort of propaganda shapes not only few people, but most of the people who are exposed to that kind of media and make decisions based on this information. And I think I related also about that in my article a little bit, how my father listening to the government and my mother listening to alternative source of information from the TPLF. They listen to different sources and they have a different interpretation and take on what was happening, and how that also affected the day-to-day life that we lived and the financial decisions that we made, and even where to invest our money, or should we kind of continue in Eritrea. All those small decisions were kind of shaped by the media that we were consuming.
That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I think it sounds almost like it's like an echo chamber. I think that's the phrase, when you surround yourself with the same voices and you legitimize what you're saying by hearing those same things come back to you. And I think that comes out as well on social media in particular. So, Teklay, can I ask you? You're very active on social media. We know. What part does social media have to play in this echo chamber? In his essay, Temesgen refers to it as a coordinated campaign, and I think we've all seen evidence of that, and like the deliberate intimidation of people who are speaking out against that government narrative plays into that. But there's this important differentiation between misinformation, meaning false information that's spread regardless of attempt to mislead, and disinformation, which means deliberately misleading information, manipulated facts. Propaganda would fall into this category, and that's characterized by intention. And we are seeing both, but most worryingly, we're seeing the latter. We're seeing deliberate misinformation being spread. So how does that work? How does an image or a statistic or a quote spread like wildfire on social media and control the narrative, not just of the state's war, but for the people, many of whom are hundreds of miles away from what's going on?
Yeah, before I start answering the very important question, can I start by thanking Temesgen for writing that article? It was very, very enlightening to read a first-hand account of how people who live under the same roof, who sleep together, who live together, could have a completely different understanding of everything because they are connected to different information sources. I think it goes a long way into explaining why is it that people in Ethiopia today have completely different understanding. If people who living, a couple could have a completely different understanding of situations than those of us who are living in different parts of the world, hearing different things, it's not surprised that we see the situation completely differently. So it was really enlightening for me, and it has made me reflect and question if there is anything that I might value because of the way that I am exposed, because of the information that I am receiving on a daily basis. And I think if everybody honestly asked themselves that question, you would at some point find that there are things that you believe because of your environment. So it was interesting, and I appreciate you writing that, Temesgen. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Teklay. Yes.
Yeah. Going back to Chessie's very important question, I think I will start with the way the war was declared. The war was declared on Facebook by the Prime Minister, and the main point, or the main reason that the war was declared, the Prime Minister said, was because forces allied with the TPLF attacked one or two or even more military bases around Tigray. That was the basic pillar that he said made the crime that they committed unpardonable, and that was the reason he said that the only way to address that was by capturing and bringing to court the people who were responsible for that. Now, 9 months down the line, for all we know, that might not have happened. We haven't heard any soldier that was killed that night. We haven't heard from any independent sources about a military camp, a military depot, or any military installation that was attacked that night. The only information, the only reporting we have is from the government side. That is the only, but the entire argument, the entire justification that is provided for the war is that so-called attack on the military base. And the second thing that the government did was to impose a blanket blackout on Tigray, so that alternative voices, so that alternative points of view didn't come out. So the only narrative that we had was the government narrative, and the government narrative was that forces allied with the TPLF had attacked a military base. Now, it was interesting, in the beginning, even international media didn't take the allegation by the government at face value. They would say, well, there was an alleged attack, for instance. But because the government pushed that propaganda relentlessly, at some point, you start the media slowly accepting the government narrative, and they slowly dropped the word alleged, and they started to say the war started after forces allied with the TPLF attacked a military base. So slowly but surely it became a fact. And now if you go into any reporting on the Tigray War, you would see that invariably all media outlets use the term after the TPLF or after forces allied with the TPLF attack a military base. So that was a disinformation for all we know. But because of the way, because of the amount of resource that was put into that, because of the number of institutions that were involved in pushing that line of argument, it has now been cemented as a matter of fact. And now even including myself, there are times when I find myself saying, after the TPLF attacked a military base. The other thing that was interesting by way of this information that the government did was when people, especially people from the international media, started to question that, or to provide alternative explanations as to how the war might have started. The government went ahead and created what they call fact check website, where they demonize, they insult, they do all kind of dirty things against anybody who tries to provide an alternative explanation, an alternative point of view. And the fact check website, in every sense, it looks like George Orwell's Ministry of Truth. So it pushes things that the government wants the world to believe. So what they say fact, has nothing to do with actual fact. It's stuff that the government wants to be believed. So, for instance, they say that the TPLF attacked military base out of nothing. They say that there was no disagreement between the TPLF and between the government before the 4th of November. Although anybody who cared to follow Ethiopian politics would know that the war had always been coming after there was some serious disagreements on some important matters on the federal system itself, on elections, on whether to postpone elections or not, on the cutting of the federal funds for Tigray. So the war had always been coming, but they don't tell you that. They want you to get the impression that the TPLF attacked the military base out of nowhere. And if you try to provide an alternative source, then you are demonized and you are called names, and the statement, the fact check website comes and provides a completely different point of view. The other thing that they do by way of disinforming, I don't know if it would be disinforming, is kind of gaslighting. So whenever there is a big development, for instance, like the report that the Amnesty International released yesterday, the government would arrange a big event in an attempt to kind of in order to dwarf the story by Amnesty, for instance, in order to make sure that people are talking about completely different things and not about the things that the other people are trying to talk. And there were also attempts to say that this was a law enforcement operation. I think that was a laughable claim that everybody knew was a lie, but they still say that it was a law enforcement operation. And actually, some of them in the PP rank say that the law enforcement operation had long been completed, and what the government has been doing for the last 8 or 7 months is trying to apprehend some people who are on the run. So as far as they are concerned, they want the world to believe that everything has been done and dusted and completed, and the government is just doing minor operations of ensuring and enforcing. So the entire foundation of the war, the entire justification that is provided for the war is based on a complete disinformation campaign.
Absolutely, and I think that word, that gaslighting, is a really interesting way of looking at it. When you've seen a picture or a video and you've been told, by the alternative narrative that's been faked or it's been doctored somehow, and that the people believing it are therefore themselves unstable, or they're trying to create their own narrative, which I think brings us quite nicely onto my next question for Temesgen, please, which is about how in your essay you talk about the disbelief that you've faced from people that you have known personally when they've seen videos and read articles about what's happening in Tigray, and you describe it as disorientating, and I think that sums it up really well, this feeling of confusion and bewilderment. It's almost like you're living in a different world. It's quite surreal. And I think that's part of the coordinated campaign that we've talked about. And as a historian, I think it speaks quite explicitly to the 4th stage of genocide, which is dehumanization, but also the 10th stage, which is denial, and the 10th is the final stage. And it works by allowing people's lives to be seen as dispensable because they are not worthy of the same humanity. So my question for you is, how does this affect the social fabric of Ethiopia? What does it mean for social cohesion when one life does not matter quite as much as another?
I'm still processing the implication, because half of my family lives in Tigray and the other half lives in Ethiopia. And my family and my friends and my circle of friends also who live in Ethiopia, half of them support the war and half of them are opposing the war. So especially the first 3 months, I could not speak to my parents. And I have a brother, and I have also cousins and extended family in Tigray. And I couldn't find any information about them. And so I was just always on the edge of what's happening. I was expecting the worst. Of course, it was quite worse. But the reaction from the people that I knew, the people who have attended my wedding, the people who have been my best friends, the people who shared my meal and my sorrow and everything. And their reaction was denial, and sometimes, calling me or labeling me junta, or all those. Sometimes it's referring to what's happening in Tigray as a fake or as propaganda, and total disbelief. And some even went further and they told me stop, or remain silent, or try to silence me. So it was a range of reactions that I could not handle, because I expected maybe I was naive to expect some sort of sympathy, but that is a natural reaction, because my family and thousands of Tigrayans are suffering under blockade, no information. There has been bombing of cities, and there has been siege, but in the midst of all this, the people that I knew better that they should respond humanly were responding in a very inhuman way, and that has been a very difficult process for me. Still, I have not recovered well from that situation, and still processing. And it has been very difficult, especially about my own feeling of being an Ethiopian and how I relate with others as Ethiopian, for example, and as a Tigrayan, and also how I see myself in the larger body politic of Ethiopia. And from my own personal experience, I would say that my friendship that I used to have, my network, has been very thin now, or has been growing very thinner, and that has been a very difficult process to go through. And I think for me, especially, if we don't agree about human suffering, how is it possible to have a country? That is kind of one central question for me. If people don't see my suffering as a real suffering, or try to politicize it, or to make it secondary, how is it possible to stand, or to consider myself or identify myself with Ethiopia? And that is still, I'm trying to process the implication or its ramifications still. But again, I think the people who denied or deflected or distorted what is happening are also part of my family. And that makes it really difficult. How is it possible that we are related in everything, we share many things, but at the same time, because of our consumption of the media and all this government-run propaganda, we ended up, seeing things differently, to the point of losing our humanity and forgetting that we are human beings and we share in this life. And that has been very difficult to handle for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think yours is a story that will resonate with many people that I've spoken with, and I'm sure Teklai knows in the same way, that feel they had friends that they worked with, supported them, and yet it was brother on brother. And I think that's an incredibly hard thing to come to terms with personally. And there are many questions to be answered in the weeks, months, and years ahead. But Teklai, I was thinking when Temesgen was giving his answer about how that it kind of comes down to this narrative of it has to be good or it has to be evil. And there's this rejection, it seems, of nuance and complexity, and anything in between is wrong and it has to be black and white. And social media obviously plays a big part in that, because it relies on snaps and facts and brevity. You've got 120 characters, but we know that never, that depth is real, and it's needed, it's necessary in these conversations. So how do we use social media in the way that it is very effective as a method of organization and mobilization, but move away from relying on these simplistic narratives that can be so harmful? What does it take to deal in nuance and complexity in the public domain, in public discourse? Because we know it's not for academics in ivory towers to debate, because these narratives are created and they are enacted in public. So the response has to also be carried out in public. So my question for you, Teklai, is what does it take to confront this?
That's a very difficult question. I think one thing that we have to realize is social media in general not designed to enable nuanced discussion by design. The incentives and the market is aligned completely differently. It's designed to create sensation and to make sure that people are engaged, whether that is by making people angry or by making people be addicted to certain things or by other means. The main purpose of social media, by and large, is not to allow or to create a conducive environment for having a sophisticated, nuanced discussion. So I think that should be the basic assumption that we have to take into account. Now, given that that is the design, given that that is a rationale for social media, I think what we can ask is, how can we exploit that to have a nuanced discussion? And I think if we are very careful and if we invest the right effort and energy into that, I think we can have nuanced discussion. And one mechanism that I have learned, which I think is very helpful to engage people in good faith on social media, be it on Twitter or Facebook, is what they call stillmanning. So whenever a person puts forward an argument or a point of view, first you make an effort to really understand what the person is saying, and you present to them your understanding of what they are trying to say, and you reach at a kind of common framework of facts. You kind of understand each other. The person trusts you, you trust that person, and you know what the person thinks, and that person knows what you think, and you establish kind of good faith relationship. And then from there is a very good chance that you could have a very nuanced discussion. But that rarely happens on Twitter. I think what people do in general is they take the worst interpretation of what a person is saying, and then they take it from there, and it turns into a mud-slinging exercise. So I think stillmanning is very important. Try to have the best intention of people. Try to interpret whatever people are saying in the most positive way. Try to engage them in positive faith. And then there is hope if you have the patience to do that. And I have tried it many times, and it works in a way, but it requires care and effort. The other thing I think is being a little bit creative in the content that we generate. So for instance, creating links to material that provides sophisticated and nuanced discussion. So for instance, we're recording this, we'll post it on YouTube. And then when you link it to Twitter, then it gives people an opportunity to log off from Twitter and to go into material that is a little bit more nuanced. So the way we generate content and the way we post content on Twitter or on Facebook, I think we can play a little bit smarter than being restricted to 240 characters on Twitter. So maybe we need to be a little bit creative in the way we generate content. But I think, again, I will emphasize the basic assumption of social media isn't to allow sophisticated, nuanced, very detailed arguments and discussions, but we can exploit that in the ways that I have described.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's almost about understanding that the person who's commenting or tweeting you is a person, and that you are a person, and that can sometimes be forgotten, especially when people have, icons and things instead of their faces, which I completely understand why that's sometimes a more appropriate way of presenting yourself. But re-humanizing one another is really important part of reaching that common ground. It's an incredibly difficult field to navigate, and so difficult, I think, that so much of the conversation seems to be happening on social media. So it seems to be, another front of the war in many ways. And my final question, really, to both of you, is that reading your essay, Temesgen, and other pieces that you've written, and other pieces by Tigrayan writers, I have been really struck by this question of belonging, particularly at the intersection of Tigrayan, Eritrean, and Ethiopian identity. And it feels to me like pan-Ethiopianism seems to rely on the narrative of the TPLF as the other, as the enemy. And we've seen this extended to everybody who is Tigrayan, regardless of their politics, regardless of their engagement. So my question for you both is, how do you navigate being a Tigrayan now? How do you navigate belonging and identity? How do you reconcile those parts of yourself and the changes that the last 10 months has brought to you as people, as individuals, negotiating who you are in the world? And Temesgen, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chessie. I have to confess, I became a Tigrayan on November 4th. That is my reality, because I grew up as the son of an army soldier. I would say that I did worship Mengistu Haile Mariam when I was a kid. When he left, or when he fled to Zimbabwe, I felt that the world was going to crumble. And when EPLF controlled Asmara, the first thing that they did was, to search military families and their houses, and searching for a document. And also they were collecting Ethiopian flags, the former Ethiopian flags, and they were collecting them and they were burning them. At one time, I remember I was holding one flag and crying. And I felt that they were trashing on my country. I was so proud, and I was writing poems. I was so patriotic. And I think for most of my life, I lived as an Ethiopian. I never paid attention to my Tigrayan identity. And I thought there is no that much contradiction between being a Tigrayan and being an Ethiopian. And I lived in Addis for the rest of my life, and I never had any particular conflict about who I am in terms of being a Tigrayan and being an Ethiopian. But this war has forced me to, confront my own in a very painful way. I would say painful way, because I always identified with what Ethiopia is. And I never felt, I know people might have some grievance or resentment against TPLF, but the way the war was conducted, I experienced it as a war against the people of Tigray, against my people, against my family, against my relatives. And that's how I saw it. And it has been a very disrupting experience for me to see myself now more as a Tigrayan first, and the relationship with being an Ethiopian is very complicated, or is evolving, I would say. And I think that has been a very painful experience in the last few months, and still I have not figured it out, like how I see myself, and because I have a large family that's spread. I have a brother who is married to an Eritrean. Half of my cousins are, ethnic, from other ethnic groups, and all this family issue, the war has made it very personal, and it has been very disruptive. So I would say my understanding of being a Tigrayan has become more stronger, and my identification with Ethiopia as a nation or as a country, the feeling is not there now, to be honest. I don't have that particular patriotic or any attachment or anything. So I don't know about the future, but that has been the way I have been trying to define myself as a Tigrayan. And that has been also very difficult for my children to process, because I raised them as Ethiopians. When the war started, it has been really difficult for them to see what's happening and to explain to them. And for example, my son is only 7, but his first song was by Teddy Afro, Agare. Maybe you have heard that one. So he saw himself as an Ethiopian, but when the war started, it has become so difficult for us to even to explain. So this is a very personal question for me also, not only for myself, but also for my family. And we were still asking this question: what is being a Tigrayan, and how does that relate both with Eritrea and with Ethiopia? And I don't have any definite answer on that because things are evolving very fast.
Wow, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And it rings very true what you were saying about your children. And I work a lot with the youth network, and I think a lot of them would agree with you that they became Tigrayan, and they became very aware that they were Tigrayan on November the 4th, because that's the first time that they had to confront that part and define themselves in such rigid terms. So I think that will resonate with many people. Thank you. Teklay, could we move to you and see how you feel about that question?
It was interesting to listen to Temesgen recount his stories, because mine couldn't be more different to Temesgen's and to, I would guess, to a lot of Tigrayans. So I grew up in Tigray. I went to university and high school in Tigray, where by and large it was only Tigrayan students in campus. So I didn't really have the chance, the opportunity to meet people outside Tigray. And I had never lived outside Tigray in Ethiopia. And when I first traveled to Addis Ababa from Mekelle, the place felt completely foreign to me. Addis Ababa, I was totally lost in every sense. The people looked different. They spoke differently Amharic. I didn't speak fluent Amharic, so language was already a huge barrier to me. So everything looked different, not in a bad way, but just different. And because of the way, because of the kind of music that I grew up listening, because of the kind of people that I met in childhood and at university and high school, when people say the word Hager or Ade, which are the Tigrayan words for country, roughly speaking, it was always Tigray that would come to mind. And the thought of Ethiopia as my country would require some effort. And to think myself of Ethiopia, it would seem a bit far-fetched, a bit artificial in me. So in that sense, I was different. I have a completely different experience to a lot of people from Tigray. And I would say it has been a blessing in disguise in a way for the last 9 months, because I haven't felt the sense of being betrayed that many people have felt. But still, I had the belief that we are people of the same country. I had the belief that although there could be this communal banter, or although there could be this rivalry every now and then, although there could be this, the things that people do in a country, I had always thought that we wish the best for each other. I had always thought that there would be a red line that we wouldn't cross other people. I had thought that when federal government, for instance, says in the open that it's going to go and invade a region to subjugate them, really, I had always thought that there would be enough number of people who would stand up and say this is a red line that we shouldn't cross. And when that didn't happen, after the war started, I was a bit shocked, and I had to ask some questions about humanity in general, and about the kind of things that we could accept if we create and engineer a situation where we hate each other. And although I wouldn't say deep friendship, I had people from other parts of Ethiopia who were in my, let's say, acquaintances, not close friends, and I had thought that they would reach out to me and talk to me, and that hasn't happened to this date. And that has been a bit difficult, but not to the degree that Temesgen has described, not to the degree that other Tigrayans would have experienced. So that would be the first point. That in a way I am a bit an outlier in this thing. But I think that the general point that I would want to make here, Chessie, is that we have created communities and societies that have been entrenched in different camps now because of the things that we mentioned earlier in terms of the information that people are receiving, and because of the cliche terms like commitment fallacy, because of confirmation bias. But people every now and then they strengthen their already held beliefs, and that has made it extremely difficult for us to come together as a country and to draw a line on the sand. And I think that is one of the things that people should really discuss. How do we break out of the bubbles that we have found ourselves and come together as a society? If we don't live as a country, at least we are going to have to live by fate of geography. We have to live as neighbors, as healthy neighbors. And that in itself is going to require discussion. And I think at some point people should stop and start asking themselves some basic questions. Is this the right way that we're going down? Or should we stop and ask hard questions, and should we come to the negotiating table and try to find a way forward? I think that is a serious question that people should ask right now.
Thank you, Teklay. That was really, really well said. Agree with all what you said. Thank you for sharing your story with us as well. This has been a really interesting and really important discussion. So thank you so much to both of you for being here. So much to take away, so much to remember from what you've both said. Temesgen, I love the story about your mother. I think that will stick with me. As a gender historian, I think it's appropriate that we say and wonder as well, when we think about how information can be power, what is the gendered impact of that as well? When information becomes this valuable commodity in war, and women can be amongst the least able to travel to access it, and maybe the least able to engage in the kind of circles where they would access it. And I'm thinking specifically about the blockade on Tigray here. Definitely worth bearing in mind whether there's a gendered impact to that information blackout as well. But I would just like to finish by asking both of you if you have any final words that you wish to share with our audience as a parting gift to them. Teklay, should we start with you?
What is a point that I should? I think the one thing that I would, maybe it's not directly related to what we have been discussing here, Chessie, but I was extremely disturbed and heartbroken reading the Amnesty report that was released yesterday. And I'm sure that everybody who has read the report will have had the same reaction. It was heartbreaking. It's extraordinary to me that people would do such a thing in this day and age. And I think we have to urge and call on the international community to bring an end to the war, because for every single day that this war drags on, those exact same things that we have read yesterday are happening to women in Tigray. And this barbaric thing should never be allowed to happen. And I think I call upon the international community and to whoever is listening to us to really try to do their best to bring to this monstrosity an end. It's been horrific, and I think it's about time that we said enough is enough.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely right. I think there's so much to unpack within that Amnesty report, and I hope that we might have the space to do that at some point in the future. But what struck me, I think, reading that, and what I want to remember is that every woman in that, every story is a person. There are words on a page, but that is a person with a family and a love and a life. And it's really important that we go through that process that we've discussed this evening of re-humanizing who is on the receiving end of this. So thank you for bringing that up, Teklay. Temesgen, do you have any final words for our audience?
I would love to say we should, or at least now I'm being more direct. And someone commented on the last article that I wrote. What would have your mother would listen now if she is alive? He asked it, and yes, she is alive, but I have not spoken to her in 3 months. but still she would be curious to hear what the other side is hearing. Like she did what she did like 40, 50 years ago, or 30 years ago. She would be interested to listen to the other perspective, to other news. And that's what I knew about my mother's curiosity. And I think my fear is sometimes we have become more living in our own social media bubbles, and we don't have the opportunity to interact more with people who have a different perspectives. But I want to insist that our lives are not collateral damage. Our lives are not secondary to the political or the historical situations that are happening in Ethiopia. Our humanity comes before everything. And as Tigrayan, I refuse to be a collateral damage or consumption. My life, my humanity comes first. But at the same time, I need to keep an open mind to, with the hope of keeping a bridge, because some of our bridges have been burned, and there's a lot of destruction that's happening. But if we're going to live as neighbors, we need to live in peace. And that means there are new bridges that need to be built and that need to be crossed. And I think I know there's a lot of anger, resentment, rage that's we have to deal with a lot. But at the same time, we need to keep hope despite the situation, and to live in peace for the future. So that's kind of there's no definite answer, but at least keep listening, even if we disagree. Keep humanizing our stories, and I would encourage, especially Tigrayans, to keep bearing witness to what we are experiencing, and never let our lives to be collateral damage.
Can I add something here, Chessie, if you have time? Yeah, I think I wouldn't have wanted to make this personal, but I, for instance, haven't spoken to my mother or to my father or to any relative that I have in Tigray for the last 9 months. And whenever we say, this is what we should do, this is what should happen, this is what TDF should do and stuff, we aren't really saying those things because we have some political motivation. We are saying those things because we believe that that would be the shortest way to allow us to speak to our family. So we could say something that other people don't like. We could say something that might outrage people. But the main reason, for the most part, we are saying things is because we believe that that would allow us to connect to our family. And I think I'm speaking on behalf of almost everybody when I say that. So let's see. I actually appreciate difference and argument and debate and all that. It's totally fine. But it's absolutely important that we don't question the motivation of people. They are trying to make sure that their family, their mother and their father and their siblings and their beloved ones are safe in Tigray and everywhere else in Amhara. Now that the war has gone to other areas as well, I should extend the same sympathy and empathy to my brothers in Amhara and other areas also who are as worried and as concerned as I have been for the last 8 months. So I think we shouldn't question the motivations. Let's just disagree on points of principle on what we should do. But I think it's important that we take people's human values and desires and wishes to meet their family at face value. I think we shouldn't question that.
Thank you so much to both of you. You've both put your points across so beautifully, and it's been raw and real. And I hope that our listeners are feeling like they can connect with this and maybe themselves feel encouraged to share their stories should they wish to do so. So I'm very grateful to you both for this very brave and important discussion that we've had this evening. But for now, we will sign off, and we hope to our audience that we will see you again soon. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.